What if the thing you've hated most about yourself was never actually the problem? What if the reason you can't seem to get your life together has absolutely nothing to do with laziness? Because lazy people don't feel guilty for resting. They don't spend Sunday nights worrying about Monday. They don't lie awake thinking about everything they should have done. They don't buy productivity books. They don't download another habit tracker. They don't watch videos like this, hoping that somehow this one will finally change everything. You do. And that's exactly why I don't think you're lazy. I think you're trapped. Trapped inside a cycle that's so common, millions of people mistake it for their personality. You wake up determined. Today's different. Today you'll finally start. You'll build the business, go to the gym, write the book, study, launch the project, become the person you've imagined for years. You make your coffee, open your laptop, take one deep breath, and then nothing. One notification becomes another. One email becomes 10. You check YouTube for 5 minutes, Instagram for 2. You tell yourself you'll start right after this. Then suddenly, it's lunchtime. By the afternoon, you're exhausted, not because you've done difficult work, because you've spent the entire day switching between tiny decisions, tiny distractions, tiny bursts of dopamine. And somehow, the thing that mattered most never happened. Again. The worst part isn't wasting the day. The worst part is knowing you wasted it. You don't enjoy procrastinating. You feel guilty while you're doing it. You're scrolling while another voice inside your head keeps saying you should be working. You watch the hours disappear, and somehow you feel powerless to stop it. Then before you go to sleep, you make yourself a promise. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow you'll wake up early, delete the apps, stick to the plan, be more disciplined, become the person you're supposed to be. Then tomorrow arrives, and somehow, the exact same thing happens again. After enough days like this, something begins to change. You stop blaming your habits. You stop blaming your phone. Eventually, you start blaming yourself. Maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe successful people have something I don't. Maybe I'm just making excuses. Maybe I'm broken. But let me ask you something. If you're really lazy, why does failing hurt so much? Why do you feel guilty every single day? Why do you keep imagining a bigger future while struggling to take the very first step? That doesn't sound like laziness. It sounds like something else. Something almost nobody talks about. Because here's what completely changed the way I see this. Your brain doesn't care about your dreams. It doesn't care about your startup, your six-pack, your bank account, or the book you've always wanted to write. Your brain has one job: keep you alive. That's it. Not successful, not fulfilled, alive. For almost all of human history, those two things were the same. The people who wasted energy didn't survive. Every unnecessary movement cost calories. Every risk could be fatal. So evolution built an incredible machine, a brain obsessed with conserving energy, a brain that constantly asks one question: can we avoid this? If the answer is yes, it rewards you for avoiding it, not because you're weak, because from your brain's perspective, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that your brain still runs the same operating system. The forest disappeared, the predators disappeared, but your brain didn't. Today, the danger isn't a tiger. It's opening a blank document, making a sales call, publishing your first YouTube video, starting a business, walking into the gym, having a difficult conversation. Your brain reacts to uncertainty almost exactly the same way. Avoid it, delay it, do it tomorrow, stay safe. And that's the cruel joke. The smarter you are, the easier it becomes to justify waiting. I just need more research. I need a better plan. I'll start on Monday. I'm not ready yet. You don't procrastinate because you're lazy. You procrastinate because your brain is incredibly good at protecting you from things that feel uncertain, even when those things are exactly what would change your life. So what if I told you that almost everything we've been taught about productivity, discipline, motivation, and hard work is backwards? Because the people who achieve extraordinary things aren't the ones who fight their brain every single day. They're the ones who stop fighting it and start designing their lives around it. And once you understand that, you stop asking, how do I become less lazy? And you start asking a much more powerful question. How do I make success require less resistance? That single question changes everything. Here's the part nobody tells you. Productivity can become the perfect form of procrastination. Think about it. How many hours have you spent watching videos about productivity instead of actually doing the work? How many notebooks have you bought only to abandon them 2 weeks later? How many productivity apps have promised to change your life? How many Sunday evenings have you spent creating the perfect plan instead of simply starting? It feels productive, but it isn't, because productivity and progress are two completely different things, and confusing the two is one of the biggest mistakes ambitious people make. Imagine someone who dreams of starting a YouTube channel. They spend 3 weeks researching cameras, another week comparing microphones, then lighting, then editing software. Then they watch a 40-minute video called 10 Mistakes Every New YouTuber Makes, then another one, and another. 3 months later, they know everything about YouTube, except how to make videos. We've all done this. Maybe not with YouTube, maybe with investing, learning a language, starting a business, getting in shape, writing a book. Different dream, same trap. Your brain loves preparation because preparation feels like progress without the possibility of failure. Think about it. If you never launch, nobody can reject you. If you never publish, nobody can criticize you. If you never ask, nobody can say no. Planning protects your ego. Action exposes it. And your brain knows that. That's why intelligent people often procrastinate more, not less. Because intelligent people are incredibly good at imagining every possible outcome, every mistake, every failure, every embarrassing moment. The smarter you are, the easier it becomes to convince yourself that waiting is the logical choice. I'll start when I know a little more. I'll wait until I have the perfect plan. I'm just preparing. But here's something uncomfortable. Nobody feels ready. Not entrepreneurs, not authors, not athletes, not YouTubers, not the people you admire. Readiness isn't something you discover. It's something you build after you've started, not before. Look back at the first video of almost any creator you respect. It wasn't great. The first company Steve Jobs built didn't change the world overnight. The first books from best-selling authors weren't masterpieces. Every expert you've ever admired has a beginning they'd probably rather forget. The difference is, they allowed themselves to be beginners. Most people don't. They spend years trying to avoid looking inexperienced, and while they're waiting, someone with half their talent but twice their courage passes them. Not because they're smarter, not because they're more disciplined, simply because they started. That's when I realized something that completely changed how I work. Success isn't built by people who always know what they're doing. Success is built by people who become comfortable looking stupid for a little while. Most people never pay that price, which is why most people never discover what they're actually capable of. So if more discipline isn't the answer, what is? The answer is leverage. Not doing more, doing what matters. Because the truth is, most of the things you do every day barely change your life, but a tiny number of actions change everything. And once you learn to identify those actions, productivity stops being complicated. it becomes incredibly simple. Not easy, simple. Which brings us to one principle that quietly sits behind almost every extraordinary success story you've ever heard: the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule sounds almost too simple to be true. But once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere. It says that roughly 80% of your results come from just 20% of your actions. Think about that for a second. If that's true, then most of what you did today barely mattered. Not because you were lazy, because you were busy doing things that felt important instead of things that actually were. Imagine two people trying to build the exact same business. The first person wakes up at 6 every morning, answers every email, checks every notification, attends every meeting, keeps the inbox at 0. The calendar is full. Every hour is scheduled. From the outside, they look incredibly productive. Now imagine someone else. They ignore almost everything. Their inbox is a mess. They miss half the meetings. They don't answer messages immediately. Sometimes they disappear for hours. It almost looks irresponsible. But during those hours, they're building the product, talking to customers, creating content, selling, improving the thing that actually grows the business. 6 months later, who do you think is further ahead? The person who stayed busy or the person who stayed focused? That's leverage. And once you understand leverage, your definition of productivity changes forever. Because productivity isn't about doing more things, it's about doing more of the right things. Everything else is just movement. We love movement. Movement makes us feel useful. Crossing something off a to-do list gives your brain a tiny dopamine reward, even if that task changed absolutely nothing. That's why answering 20 emails feels strangely satisfying, even when none of them move your life forward. Your brain doesn't naturally measure impact, it measures completion, and those are very different things. Imagine spending your entire day digging a hole. You work hard, you sweat, you never stop moving. 8 hours later, you're exhausted. Now imagine the hole was in the wrong place. All that effort created nothing. Life works the same way. You can spend years working incredibly hard on things that don't matter. And because you're always busy, you never notice. One of the hardest questions I ever asked myself was this: if I could only work for 2 hours tomorrow, what would I actually do? At first, I hated that question because suddenly most of my calendar became impossible to justify. The unnecessary meetings, the endless emails, the constant checking, the fake urgency, they all disappeared. And what remained was surprisingly small. Create, sell, learn, think. Everything else was supporting those things, not replacing them. That's when I realized most people don't need better time management. They need better elimination. The most successful people aren't masters of doing everything. They're masters of deciding what deserves to be ignored. Because every unnecessary yes is stealing time from the one thing that could actually change your life. And here's the crazy part. This doesn't just apply to work. It applies to everything. Fitness, relationships, learning, money, health. A handful of habits create almost all of your results. The rest is mostly noise. So stop asking yourself, what else can I add? Start asking, what can I remove? Because every distraction you eliminate makes the important work easier. Every unnecessary decision gives you more energy. Every commitment you decline creates space for something meaningful. Success isn't usually built by adding more. It's built by removing what doesn't belong. But even after people understand this, most of them still struggle. They finally know what matters, and yet they still don't do it. Why? Because the biggest enemy was never time. It was something much more invisible: decision fatigue. Have you ever noticed that the hardest decision of the day is often the smallest one? What should I eat? Should I go to the gym now or later? Should I answer this email first or work on my project? Should I start or wait until I feel more focused? None of these decisions seem important, but together they slowly drain something incredibly valuable: mental energy. And unlike time, mental energy isn't unlimited. Every decision you make costs something. By the end of the day, most people aren't physically exhausted, they're mentally bankrupt. That's why it's so easy to promise yourself in the morning that tonight you'll finally work on your dream. But when evening comes, Netflix somehow feels like the better option. Not because you've changed your mind, because your brain has spent the entire day making thousands of tiny decisions. By then, it's simply tired. This has a name: decision fatigue. And once you notice it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Think about Steve Jobs. People joke that he wore the same black turtleneck every day. Mark Zuckerberg, almost the same gray t-shirt. Barack Obama once explained that he deliberately reduced small daily decisions because he wanted to save his mental energy for the decisions that actually mattered. People laughed, but they completely missed the point. The clothes were never the point. The energy was. Successful people don't necessarily have more discipline. They simply waste less decision-making power on things that don't deserve it. Now think about your own day. Before you've even started working, you've already made dozens of decisions. When to wake up, what to wear, what to eat, which messages to answer, which app to open, whether to check your notifications, whether to reply now or later. Your brain is constantly switching gears, and every switch comes with a cost. Then people wonder why they can't focus for more than 10 minutes. Focus isn't disappearing by accident. You're spending it before the important work even begins. That's why motivation feels so unreliable. Some mornings, everything feels easy. Other days, starting feels impossible. But once you understand what's really happening, something changes. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and you start asking, "Why is this harder than it needs to be?" That's a much better question, because your brain isn't your enemy. It's simply following the path you've designed for it. Every default matters. Every notification, every tab, every app on your home screen, every decision you have to make before you can begin. People think discipline creates consistency. Most of the time, consistency creates discipline. Because every successful habit starts with making the first action almost impossible to avoid. Don't rely on motivation. Reduce friction. Don't try to become someone with unlimited willpower. Become someone who needs less of it. That's why the most productive people obsess over systems, not motivation. They prepare tomorrow today. They remove choices. They automate small decisions. They make the right action the easiest one. Because every tiny bit of resistance compounds. But so does every tiny bit of momentum. Open the document before you stop working. Lay out your gym clothes tonight. Put the book on your pillow. Delete the app that's stealing 2 hours every day. None of those actions feels life-changing. Together, they completely change your trajectory. You don't need to become a different person. You need to design a different environment. Because your environment doesn't just shape what you do, it quietly rewrites who you believe you are. Stop trying to fight your brain. Start designing for it. Because ambition isn't rare. Talent isn't rare. Potential isn't even that rare. What's rare is someone who builds a life where doing the important thing becomes the easiest thing. That's the difference between people who constantly start and people who consistently finish. So if you've been calling yourself lazy, maybe it's time to retire that label. Maybe you've believed you were lazy for years. Maybe it started small, a missed deadline, an unfinished project, a promise you didn't keep. And somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing those as things that happened and started seeing them as who you are. But think about everything you now know. The brain that protects you, the energy that drains, the friction that compounds. None of that was a character flaw. It was a system. What if you spent all those years trying to fix yourself when the only thing that ever needed fixing was the system around you? You were carrying a design problem and calling it a personality. So tonight, when that old voice shows up, you don't have to argue with it. Just ask it one question. What did I remove today? Because you're not who you were on your worst day. You're whoever you design tomorrow to be. You're probably not lazy. You're simply carrying too much friction. Remove a little of it today. Remove a little more tomorrow. Keep going. And one day, the things that feel impossible today will simply feel normal. If this video changed how you see yourself, subscribe, because understanding how your mind works is the first step toward building a life that works with it instead of against it. The person you've been waiting to become is just you, minus the friction.